Good morning and welcome all to the Development and Regeneration Scrutiny panel. First item on the agenda is apologies for absence. We've got an apology from Councillor Mary Jones, who may join us later, but also apology from Councillor David Jenkins. I think that's all. There's nobody else. Okay, second item on the agenda is the disclosure of personal and prejudicial interests. Are there any? Members, officers? No? Okay, item 3 is the item which is always on scrutiny panels, the prohibition of whip votes and declaration of party whips. Item 4 are the minutes of the previous meeting. They have been circulated. I shall go through them. Page 1, page 2, the tourism and destination management plan. Just to keep everybody up to date, we have asked, because such an important part of the economy of Swansea, that we have a report on this each year. Then page 3, regeneration program and project management report. And page 4, and the last item on page 4 is the exclusion of the public and the project management report, which was held in camera. Is everybody happy with those minutes? All okay? Right, thank you. Then the next item on the agenda is public questions, where we have none. And item 6 is audit report, town centre regeneration. And I assume Councillor Robert Francis Davis, the cabinet member, would you like to say something?
I will hand over to Paul Ralph. As you see in the report, the findings on 2.2, it doesn't really tell you much of what we don't know. In fact, I don't think it tells anything that we don't know, really. And so I think we are lucky. One point that it does say there, it needs an ambitious leadership to make sure that we push things forward, and I believe we have that. The amount of projects that are going on in Swansea compared to other cities is quite staggering, and so I believe that showing the ambition that Swansea is, we are on the way to doing the best that one can to give us a leading edge over other cities that are going through the problems in the United Kingdom. When I see the projects, and they will be touched on later by Hugh Mowbray there, I think we are, and I'm not going to say Swansea is flying, but I think we are doing the best that we can in these circumstances, the financial circumstances that we're in. You know, news today again, the state of some of the banks. So I think that Swansea has done well to attract projects that we are, and concentrating on the city centre, whether you come in by train. If you look at the projects from the Palace, the Albert Hall, High Street, the regeneration there, work in Wine Street, the market is still a marvellous little jewel in the crown. But also the private sector, I think, has followed what we've been doing in the Copper Bay quarter, is that the private sector, I think, has seen the confidence shown by the council and supported by Welsh Government, that they are now investing far greater in the city centre. You see blocks coming up in Oxford Street, on Castle Square, Orchard House that was developed is 100% let, which that's very encouraging. When money is spent and invested, that is followed up by people coming to live and work in the city centre. But I don't think this audit, as I said, is really told us anything that we don't know. Paul, I don't know if you want to add anything.
So, Chair, with your permission, I'll just canter through the the report. So hopefully you've all had a chance to read the Audit Wales report itself, which is it's an interesting read, and it's fair to say it reflects on several decades of development, and I think that's a really important point to put all this in context. Is this is a long-term thing, and we talk about the current shocks. The shock that I refer to as the back in the 1940s, World War II, and the impact on Swansea and other cities across the country. That there's always something happening. Some major shocks, catastrophes, all sorts of things can happen, but people carry on living. People carry on living in these places. People love their towns, villages, and cities, and these are places where people congregate and want to do things. And people love these spaces for a variety of different reasons, and the report is trying to capture that. And I think the economic delivery plan we have for South West Wales at the moment is trying to acknowledge that, the experience of place, the sense that the place is built of micro businesses in the main. Something like 95% of our business base is micro, and that's really important. And I think the levers we're beginning to pull are acknowledging that, as well as the large scale projects. You have to look at the smaller end as well, and give support there. And I know many members will have been involved in the process of helping us with that. The findings I've listed there, I won't read them off. Councillor Robert Francis Davis has just alluded to some of them there. That's the snapshot that Audit Wales are taking at this moment in time, and reflecting really a broad sweep of issues across several decades, as I said. I'll take each response in turn, just to give a flavour, and this is quite broad intentionally because it's quite a reflective report. So taking the first one, as town centres at the heart of Welsh life. We all know we have the city centre itself, which itself comprises multiple communities in its own right, as well as the larger district town centres that I've listed in the report, which in their own way are market towns built on the back of industry. Sketty as a place, coal mining, coal that was supplying the copperworks. Morriston, residential area for copperworks. Clydach, similarly along the Swansea Canal. Every one of those places is part of the industrial legacy and goes back further than that again. But the reason that the commercial centres formed was utility, people living in a place needing certain facilities, and that remains constant throughout this period of change. The vernacular of the place as well is important. If you look around, nearly all of the key places referenced there have an element of red brick in the construction of the crossroad feature buildings, whether that's from the grind works in Morriston or the other brickworks around the county. That's part of the vernacular, but some of that was damaged in the interests of access in getting people through by widening roads. So certain buildings have been lost, which interrupts the character. And there's this continual balancing act of preservation versus the current perception of what amenity is and where people feel things should be going. I've referenced there on the ambitious leadership point. There are a number of significant projects going on. I'll leave that hanging. That's one for Councillor Francis Davis. But there are significant projects underway around the city. And there's a news story this morning on Swansea Online counting the number of cranes on the skyline. But again, there are a range of scales of project there, from the tens of millions down to the much smaller. Over the post-war period as well, tastes have changed, the way people live has changed, and it's interesting even to note that properties were being converted from residential to commercial even during the 1960s, and possibly now beginning to go back. So this mix of uses is something that has always been there. And when you think back to, if you look at the aerial photos of the city centre pre-war, hundreds and hundreds of terraced houses, which were feeding the retail core. So in a way, in some ways, which were wiped out in the Blitz, and now we're putting some of that back, perhaps. As well, I suppose, if you think about the impact of out of town and things like that there are trade-offs all the way through this. That was the taste at the time. That's where people wanted to go, and the market responds. So really, and looking at the post-COVID response as well, there was a need to attempt to support businesses during that time in a variety of ways, particularly enabling outdoor trading, which is perhaps a long-standing ambition anyway. But support did go in there. It's quite critical, really. The communication channels around the way that public bodies intervene in this work, particularly where resources are scarce. We have to make sure that developments that are taking place are compatible, and that there is regular dialogue across all sectors. And procurement frameworks are an important part of that. The ability to move quickly to make decision making as fleet of foot as possible. There is a comment in the report that perhaps the levers of town centre regeneration are not being pulled effectively. So I've listed some of the headlines of what is available and how some examples of how they're being used. So, for example, each of the city centre and the district centres is eligible for placemaking grant support and the creation of a place plan, range of strategic projects going along across the city centre, some public sector, but increasingly a lot of private sector schemes where grant funding is going in to plug the viability gap. And part of the thing there is that the market won't always do maybe what is required. So you do have to intervene, but that is increasingly a mix of loan and grant. It's not just grant going in there, and that is levering private sector resources. So I've mentioned the strategic grants there, the Town Centre Loan Fund, of which Swansea is, I think, now the biggest user in Wales of that fund. Total project cost all in is something like 39 million, something like 20 million pounds of loan within that. It's significant, and that is unlocking nearly every one of the private sector schemes you'll see of varying scales, from the very, very small up to the significant, the really large ones. That is going in to help reduce the risk and to help enable the private sector to take that positive step forward and providing facilities that otherwise wouldn't be there. We also have a live enforcement action plan, and with support from Welsh Government, using that to work on problem buildings. And whilst there may be a perception things aren't happening, the first steps in that process are negotiation. I'm trying to push as far as you can with negotiation before you get to the point of having to use enforcement. So and a number of the projects we're working on are in that category, and actually in most cases they're being resolved before they need to reach the point of enforcement. The Economic Recovery Fund has also been a helpful source of funding and enabled us to broaden, for example, supports to microbusinesses across the county in all of the district and local centres in some shape or form. And what's interesting there is there can be a capacity issue for people that are not used to getting support. You know, that's quite an eye-opener and will be helpful to design future schemes. There's a comment about the Town Centre First policy not yet being fully embedded. We've been asked now to prepare place plans for each of the major town centres across the county and the city centre itself, and those will pull together all the different strands that are referenced above. And it's an ongoing journey, I would say, of keeping all these, trying to keep all these things in balance, responding to what people want, but also perhaps trying to gently nudge things in the right direction as well. People want an experience when they go to a place, a variety of uses, but equally it's use it or lose it, isn't it? You could argue as well that post-COVID you're in a similar place where you know, lots of things have perhaps been lost, and the supply chain issues that businesses are facing in particular, and everybody is facing, and that's affecting the way that people are using high streets. It's affecting the way people use local facilities. So we have to be mindful of all of this, but the levers are there and being used. And you know, local authorities are critical to that, and it's not just Swansea. It's every town and city across Wales and UK and beyond. I've lived in many different cities myself, and they all have similar characteristics to Swansea. Similar interventions that happened in the 1960s and 70s. Even in when I lived in Germany for a year, town there, similar thing. You've got historic buildings being blended with large-scale modern developments, and then a clawing back of that when they realise perhaps they've gone too far. It's not unique to this place, but we're pushing ahead as best we can with this. And as I mentioned just now, there's if you want to nudge these things, you have to put the mechanisms in place to do that. And you can see across the city now, private sector, third sector, RSLs, and the council, with Welsh Government support and UK Government support now as well through the Levelling Up Fund, are now pushing forward. But this is a moment in time. It will continue to change, and in some ways we have to be almost trying to predict the next change and being ready for that. So development of certain structures and buildings and key arteries around the county and around the region are making sure those things are there for the future as well. Things like the Palace Theatre, the Albert Hall, historic structures, they're made fit for purpose now. So whatever the end use is when they're completed this year, they will have further uses in the future because they've been repaired. If you let them fall down, they're gone forever. So that's just a few examples, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Paul. Rob,
Yeah,
Francis?
you've seen that in the conclusions there that we are using a robust and full range of tools and funding opportunities, and I think it would be remiss really not to thank Paul and his team for the work they do, not just with Cure for ourselves with our Economic Regeneration Fund, but with Welsh Government and with central government in making sure that we're not missing any opportunities to bring funding, much needed funding in, where it is needed. Paul brought lots, and his team brought lots of money in when we were in Europe. We're not in Europe. And I know probably everybody around this table wishing we still were, but where we are is where we are. So we still got to make sure that we can bring in the funding where we can. And I'm glad to hear that we are probably getting the biggest slices that's available in Wales. And that is not by accident. That is because of the work put in by our officers. So thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. Right. Phil, did you want to say a few words?
Yeah, could I just add one thing? This report, I mean, it's an all Wales audit. It's the first one that's been done for a long time in terms of this sector. I haven't seen other authorities and how they've responded to it, but all of them are probably due to respond in the way that we have. And all I wanted to say was, I think it'd be nice to see those, because I do believe Swansea is so far ahead of some of those other authorities now. And you would expect me to say that, but I think it is the truth. And when we have conversations with Welsh Government, they often use Paul and his team as an exemplar, and the work that we're doing in terms of town centre renewals and that sort of thing. And they point to us and say, look, this is how we'd like it done across the country. So it's just a feather in Paul and his team's cap, really, in terms of how we've responded over the last few years. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. Right, I got Peter Black first.
Thank you, Chair. Can I certainly reflect the thanks to Paul and his team for the work they're doing in this, and I think that this does tell a good story about Swansea, and I'm happy to back that up, because clearly it is evident that we are using the tools that are available and that we are delivering in town centres. And I've got Cumberland Square hopefully later this year, where we're going to be using the recovery fund to sort out as an example of how we can do that on a small scale as well. What struck me about this actually was the comments about the inconsistent approach across Wales, and Phil has highlighted that in saying he'd like to see what the other local authorities do. What I'm interested in is what the Welsh Government's response to this report is, because they're the ones who have the overview of this. They provide some of the tools which we're using, but do they actually have proper guidance in place and a proper strategy in place for the whole of Wales, which local authorities should be following? Because it seems to me that is what's missing from and is highlighted as missing from this report. And I was wondering whether we should be making that point to them.
Yeah, but Paul, do you want to answer that? If you can.
You heard the reference to place plans as they're referring. I think that really that's part of that story. There is an agreed template for the formulation of those plans across every significant town in Wales, really, and that is going to provide a significant opportunity, even with our own county, But they're not necessarily very long documents, but they force you to consider the actions. And I think it's important. This is an action-based approach as well. The actions that are needed to make these things work. Have you mentioned bullet square, Peter? I mean, yeah, absolutely. You know, it's how these, you know, it could be softening. But then you think of all of the different parts of the council impact on even just that small scheme, and you know, it's important all those things are taken into account, and things like health planning. You know, if as an example, if you could do too much consolidation, you would take you know, Gorse Island High Street. If everything was in one location out of the town centre, you could be taking away all the chemists, all the dentists, all the shoppists, all of the small businesses that we sat on calls with. And you know, that you need that that mix almost. So I think the place plans are probably the bedrock in the town centre position statement they've just released, but we can always do more.
Can I just?
I'm sorry.
Okay.
But did that answer your question?
I've just, I mean, I agree with that. I think the place plans are good. I don't remember us being that short, actually. But I think the placemaking plans, it does strike me that some councils look upon placemaking as just part of planning and not part of regeneration. And I think that's the issue in terms of the Welsh Government, that maybe they actually have to have a national strategy on this, as well as instead of just relying on the councils doing the placemaking, in accordance with the planning guidance. That's just the point I wanted to make.
Yeah, I think Peter's quite right in that when we were looking at, you know, the placemaking and some of the grants that were available, they were only available over so many districts within Swansea. And we thought that was wrong, that on the Economic Regeneration Fund, we thought that every single ward probably has its own little centre that is essential to that ward. And when I look at, and you mentioned Cumbulla, you know, and or Bryn Yfed, again, essential, you know, to that community. You look at the uplands, it's got its own identity, and each of these places have their own identity. And it is important that we make sure that we can improve placemaking in each one of those separate communities, because, you know, Swansea is made up of lots of separate communities, but all relying on each other right across. So I think that we can, I suppose, we can't try and cover everything, but, you know, the Economic Regeneration Fund, as Paul was saying, you know, we had meetings with that, well, the opportunity everybody had of every councillor looking at their area of how we could do it. Perhaps we're not delivering as fast as we can. The sheer volume showed that what we were doing was right, because everybody wanted to try and take advantage of that. The volume is making sure that we can deliver on all that now. The will is there. It just takes a bit of time dealing with every sort of idiosyncrasy of every area. But I think the plan is right to make sure that we do it the Swansea way, I suppose.
Right. One thing that I would like to say is that what they don't take account of is the fact that retail that's required now in city centres going forward is going to be less, because Marks and Spencer, for example, now say half of their sales are now online, and other retailers are saying the same thing. And, you know, I know it's not a good thing to say, but we need less retail in city centres. And the mayor of Bristol recently, he said that in Bristol we must reduce retail a lot because it's not viable. That's all I got to say.
Yeah, you're quite right, Councillor, and I think that's where the experience point comes in, and it's interesting as well. It's not pure retail now that is occupying where we're issuing startup grants and the like, or doing building conversions. There's a mix of uses going into those premises. So it doesn't have to be about pure retail either. And actually, in some cases, as I say, you know, some shops that were houses converted into shops in the 1960s can go back to being a shop again, you know, sorry, a house again. So yeah, you're right. And but in future, if demand for a particular fashion comes in, they may revert again. It's just making sure that we don't do anything that prevents future development, I guess, and not losing key structures in the process, perhaps.
Yeah, the other point is a lot of the business going online is large retailers. So I think there's an opening in a place like Swansea for smaller local firms.
It's interesting. You take there's a large retail unit on High Street, Mackworth Court, owned by Coastal Housing. They had some support through the Transforming Towns programme to divide that from one large unit into 4 small ones, and even during COVID, all 4 let, and not necessarily retail. Coffee shops, bars, and the like, but they are all in use. All 4 were let even during COVID. So, and I think smaller spaces as well. Obviously, there's a significant amount of relief available in smaller units, and they're very popular. So it's the bigger and the big names and the big brands maybe that they're struggling more, but the local independent has flourished, which does give plus as well. I mentioned the sub-communities almost within these places, and you think each of our town centres, there's a significant amount of terraced housing and other housing immediately surrounding those, and those are the people that are using those places. You take Woodfield Street, you've got a Premier, you've got a convenience store at either end of the town, and each of those is a completely different customer base who live within 2 minutes walk of that place, often elderly. So it's really interesting. And the city centre as well, as we're adding housing above shops, that's forming new communities and communities of students and others, not just students obviously, but each of those places needs its own little mix, which needs smaller units probably rather than the larger ones, which is interesting. So flexibility is of these spaces is all of the new. Robert mentioned Orchard House. They started with the first floor of that as a single commercial unit, but they were asked to partition it, and that's now filled with small businesses on the first floor. So the one big unit wasn't working. So the ability to partition and reconfigure is. But then as those businesses grow, maybe then you can remove some partitions. It's keeping the flexibility as well, I think.
Councillor Mike White.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, obviously it's interesting here of the sort of lower out town areas and the income, but I don't think this is just by accident. This is good for forward looking, because as you say, the Cumberland has been mentioned, Brewer Square. Now these are main arteries into the city of Swansea. But also by doing that in the outside areas, would you believe that this is encouraging more investment into those small areas of the community? Because quite a lot of the business in these communities are actually family-run local businesses, and giving support to them. But it's also showing that that we are not just only concentrating on the city centre.
David.
Yeah, look, it's changing all the time. Retail is changing. City centres are changing. The Blitz annihilated Swansea. I was born in High Street, and in High Street, it was bustling. It was thriving. But then lots of people who moved out into the there was Townhill, there was Penland, there was Place, there was Blineham Ice, Portmead. People moved out of the centres, and for very good reasons. They were much better quality housing. Swansea had really good housing after the Blitz, but the city centre didn't have that many people living in it. I think it was 19% of the people of Swansea lived in the city centre, compared to most other cities. That is 40%, I think, if it was the figure I remember that was quoted. So it's trying to get people back into the city centres. And I look at places like High Street now, where you've got a lot of student accommodation, a very good quality student accommodation compared to what people were living in HMOs. It's helped that problem. The HMOs, people have now got quality student accommodation, and those people themselves are then becoming very good customers of the buildings. And there was many empty old public houses in High Street, now being converted into coffee shops and convenience stores, and it's bringing a different type of mix and a different type of retail, which I think is to be encouraged. That what we want is people having good quality accommodation, good quality services, it is small, it is micro, as Paul has said, but it's making sure that it has a look of its own and a feel of its own. Swansea, you know, Swansea is Swansea. We're not Cardiff, we're not Bristol, we're not London. I think, as Urban Splash said the other day, they put up a slide saying, we want to be like, not London crossed out, Cardiff crossed out, and Swansea was emblazoned across what they were showing. And we want people to come and live in Swansea, work in Swansea. But that's needed a big change, and that big change needed to spend a lot of money. And we are spending a lot of money, but it is making a difference for that quality of life that people have when they are being brought up there.
Anybody else? Oh, Councillor Jeff Jones.
Yeah, thanks, Paul, for the report. And I know it is an audit report, but, what you've actually added to it as well. I think, what's actually clear and perhaps worries me, they're actually saying that local authorities have got to become more interventionists into the process all the time. In other words, actually keep putting, shall we say, funds in. I know they've actually got grants and so on, and it worries me. I know we actually mentioned the private sector and so on, but the private sector actually only come into it to make a profit. They're not here really for, any particular city at the end of the day. I'm worried really that the local authorities have only got a limit where they can actually intervene, shall we say, in the process. I know, we've got grants and so on, but we can't keep really, shall we say, I would like the private sector to come into Swansea and actually put 100% in, not so on. It seems to be the other way around at the moment, that we've got to entice people to actually come here. And I think, the city actually mirrors the spending power of the people in Swansea. I think if we haven't got a high level of, shall we say, high wages, and I think the city is actually mirroring what the money people have actually got at the present time. You actually mentioned earlier with regards to 95% of the businesses are micro businesses. Are we talking about the city centre, or are we talking about the city and county of Swansea with these micro businesses? And when we class a micro business, where does it go from one person up to 10 people? What sort of level are we actually talking about there? I'd love really for, we've lost a lot of large businesses, Fords and so on, actually, in the area that got well-paid jobs. And those jobs need to be replaced, because some of the, as I said, businesses perhaps won't come here, the retail businesses won't come here unless the people have got the spending power. So I think, that's a problem that needs to be resolved.
So on the micro business point, I think it's 0 to 25. It's in the very small scale, and an SME is up then to 250, and it's both. And I suppose part of the thing we've been trying to address over many years now, and working with Hugh's team, it's trying to get things at both ends of the spectrum. You've got to be able to create affordable spaces and a micro business can be all sorts of things. And I mean, just looking at startup grants we've issued over the past 12 months, you've got all sorts in that. You've got florists, you've got craftspeople, you've got plumbers, electricians, gardeners, all sorts of different skills and talents. Some of them don't need a high street presence. Some of them had never even considered a high street presence and just want to be online. So it's a bit of a thing of making the opportunity available for them. And you're right about the spending power impacting, because actually it's the spending power that affects the businesses that are there. Because yes, you're right, they are only there because they want to earn a living. They're not there to keep the building they're sitting in that we think that's quaint and lovely, let's keep it there forever. Maybe it doesn't suit them to have it, like it affects the business. So I think to give you some encouragement, the the private sector are coming forward now in increasing numbers. So a lot of the new developments, you've got Morganstone Carter, you've got Pacer developments, you've got Easy Living coming in from Newport, and they're attracted to the place not just because of the grants. The actual grant funding compared to the total project cost is usually quite low, and there's loan involved as well. So they know there's a repayment issue. It's just, I suppose, it's all part of the bridging this viability gap and closing it. And I mentioned the Orchard House example particularly because that's an example where that first floor had been vacant for years after Elva left that building. But if you look now, the ground floor is, I think, is virtually fully let, and the first floor is let to different businesses that work upstairs. And you can see that happening across the district centres, and it's a slow process because working with the owners of the properties and the businesses themselves takes time. If people aren't used to having this type of intervention available, that there is a bit of a thing of educating them on that as well. But it is beginning to work, and the amounts of money that have to go in reduce is the other thing as well. And the fact that the private sector are coming forward in larger numbers now is helpful, I think. So it's and that's across, I would suggest, the ERF experience. You can see it across the county, and families are part of that, communities are part of that, and you can tell that these people are built into their places, and that actually gives them the boost they need to keep going in some cases. So it's not all doom and gloom, hopefully.
Sorry,
On that point is
Yeah.
that that on the private sector, we have seen people like Peter Loosmore, and I mentioned Orchard House there, 100% let. People like Ian Morgan of Morganstone, Carter Holdings is the holding company for Morganstone and West Acres. But they feel they're from Swansea and they want to actually make Swansea a better place. They have succeeded because they come from Swansea. The education that they had in Swansea, and they want to put something back. And I think there is a sense of belonging. I want to make it a better place. You say some people will come in and make the money, they're there for profit. Well, profit to me isn't a dirty word. If you don't make profit, you're not in business, you don't stay around. But if you're local companies and that money is kept local and spent local, I believe in it. We talk about Fords, and Henry Ford would make, any car, because any color you like, as long as it's black. But the people who were making those cars couldn't afford those cars. So the price had to go down. The only way the price went down when they were in America, or we get them made in Mexico, or we get them made somewhere else. And the same would happen here. They went to Eastern Europe to get things made. So everybody driving the price down, and so people to be able to afford them. The jobs were actually lost. They went out to Swansea. But what we need is an industry. I remember people promising me better bus services, cheaper buses with a deregulation. When we had a nationalised bus industry, people complain, "Oh, this needs to be privatised." It hasn't made it better. So I would suggest the private bus service. What we've had is a much worse service now. So we didn't get what we were promised, and that I want to see local companies employ local people, do exceptionally well in Swansea. Let's do it, the Swansea way. It's having that Swansea teamwork, working with our universities. We've got a lot of well-educated people coming out of Swansea. We want those people to have the opportunities in Swansea and make their businesses in Swansea, not have to go away to work. And I think I get a greater feeling now than I've ever had, and I've been 40 years on this council, that Team Swansea approach is actually working. So I've got confidence in the future for Swansea. But going back to this audit report, it has it's told us the obvious, but I think we were already doing it, the Swansea way, and not waiting for somebody to tell us what the problem is throughout the country.
Yeah, I agree. You know, I don't think profit is a dirty word at all. What I was trying to actually say was nobody opens a business that's not going to be viable to close it at the end of the day. And there needs to be the, you know, well, you know, that's it. And I just going to add really what Phil actually said with regards to a comparator to other local authorities. Be interested to see what sort of scale they're at.
Right. One comment I'd like to make, a general comment, which I think most people would agree with. The problem in Swansea is not lack of jobs. The problem in Swansea is lack of well-paid jobs. And you know, this is the heart of the problem. I mean, it's nothing to do with, you know, if you compare with other English cities in particular, you know, they've got people in well-paid jobs. That's all.
Anyone else now? Are we online? No. No. Okay. Paul, having read this audit report, it is stating the obvious, but there are issues about it which I think need to be said, and we will put them in a letter to you, and I think we should actually respond to the Audit Commission as well. The current situation you go through here, about 1 in every 7 shops in the high street in Wales is empty. I know this was done in 2001. Oh, it's September 2001. But that's an indictment, not just about Swansea. That's an indictment about Wales. And I think we should make a comment about that. And then it goes on to say, what have we done? Since 2014, we've invested just under £900 million in Regeneration. £900 million. You know, when you consider that they bought an airport for £52 million, our airport has been losing money quicker than you can imagine. You know, you then start thinking about, well, what have they actually done? And when we are talking about, it says at the beginning, we have about villages, 193 places in Wales with over 2,000 residents. So that's a lot to share that 900 million around. You talk about other cities in the UK and interventions and what have you. Yes, you have interventions, but we've also seen large investments in, you know, Cardiff. I'm not going to go on about Cardiff because that upsets me about how much money was actually being spent there. But Newport has had quite, not as much as Swansea, admittedly, but it has done reasonably well. But when you start looking at some of the English cities, it is this definitely disproportionate, and I think that is the issue. So whilst I accept the fact that what we're doing in Swansea at the moment is doing the right thing, we are, and the investment in private investment in the city is basically to build flats, which is fine. They have had some businesses, you said about Orchard House and a few others, but we've seen massive development of flats, etc. That's fair enough. But I think the audit report does state the obvious, and I think we would be saying a few things that we would, as a panel, like to say, or with the consent of the rest of the members, write back to the audit committee and ask them, the audit office, and actually ask the question, well, can we have an updated idea across Wales? You know, because that sort of investment does lend itself to ask those questions. Councillor Davis?
Yeah, I going back in time, I can remember that we were part of 20 major cities in the UK, and we compared ourselves with those 20. It's no good comparing yourself with somewhere else unless it's of a similar makeup, you know. So as a city of approximately 250,000, where I suppose if you take in the outer regions, you know, probably we are catering for what, 600,000 in Swansea as immediate, it's sort of travelling in, whether it's Carmarthen, Neath, but all that coming into Swansea, you know. And I think we should be comparing ourselves not with just Wales, but those major cities, or like ourselves, that middle group throughout the United Kingdom, because I think you know, you don't compare perhaps your Ford Fiesta with, you know, a Bentley, you know, because the different price range, the different product. I think we should be comparing ourselves. So this is a Welsh audit report. So just to compare it in Wales, I think we should be comparing it on a UK basis. I think, you know, for it to be meaningful for us.
I totally accept what he's saying, but this is the Wales audit report, and that's what we are scrutinising. So that's what we're saying. And you are right. When we were in the cities, the group, the city centre groups, I think it was the top 40 or something, whatever it was, throughout the country. You know, we were steadily going down, but a lot of other cities had the same problem. You know, so I think it's relevant. But as this is for the Welsh audit office, I think we should concentrate on what's happening in Wales. Anyone else? No? Well, Paul, can I thank you very much for your report? Can you go back and thank the team for their efforts in getting money for the city? You know, I think congratulations to you all on that. Thank you. We move on to the next item, which is item 7, Regeneration Programme Project Monitoring Report. Councillor, sorry to embarrass you, Hugh, and give you a less of a job. Mr. Hugh Mowbray.
Thank you. Starting on Copper Bay, the snagging is progressing on that in terms of finalising all the works. You'll have seen the tent around the spiral staircase in front of the arena recently. That's now come down and the works are being completed there, for example. And obviously the works on the north side are progressing to completion as well. The north block, there is an ongoing discussion and the contractor has a clear plan for finalising the works on that as well. On a much more positive note, I guess, the figure in the report in terms of tickets sold is actually wrong now. It's now gone up to over 200,000 tickets that ATG have sold, and they're saying that the sales density, or how many tickets they're selling and how quick they're selling those tickets in Swansea compared to some of the same shows elsewhere, is better in Swansea as well. So yeah, fine.
Yeah,
Fine.
okay.
Fine.
You want to ask a question on Copper Bay?
Yeah, fine.
Yeah, just a couple of things. What exactly is the problem with the North Block? That's the first question. What's the problem with it?
There's an
I
issue.
suggest there could be an element of that which will need to be discussed in private.
There would be, I guess, but you know, it's lots of it is in the public domain. It's been in the papers recently. There is an issue with the steelwork, with the paint on the steelwork, and the contractor is currently remedying that in terms of taking off any areas which are affected and replacing that entirely at their own cost. So it's not a cost issue for the council. But the contractor is under the contract. They've got to resolve this and hand over a building in a proper manner, in a proper state of condition as well. So that is what's currently happening.
Okay. Yeah, it's good that they've sold well 140. You said it's gone up to 200,000 now. That's over 12 months.
It's coming up to 12 months virtually now, I think, isn't it? Yeah.
So what's the I can't think of the word, but the capacity of the theatre that's actually, you know, is it 80%, 90%, 70%, or?
I'd have to ask that question, but it's selling out very, very well. There are only 2 or 3 events which haven't sold very well in my understanding. Lots of things are sold out. You know, Michael McIntyre has been here twice now. He is sold out within 5 minutes, both times. The Hollywood Vampires with Johnny Depp and his colleagues who are coming to Swansea, which is the first place they're playing in the UK. That sold out in 3 minutes. So it's doing pretty well in terms of general sales. Yeah, so that's
because of the way it can be set up. It's not fair to say what is the capacity. The capacity can be from, depending on what's going on there, whether it's all seated or whether the floor at the bottom is standing only. So it can be, if it's all seated, it could be from 2,000 or up to 3,000, depending on the show and the makeup of the audience. There's a lot of people want to go to a more pop concert, want to stand. There's others then, if they go in to see Six that came there, would want it to be all seated. So, you know, there is a difference. So it's difficult to give you the capacity for.
Six was sold out, and it's just announced it's coming back.
Yeah.
Again, because it did so well the first time.
You've answered my question actually, because there's a bit of confusion. There's been 3,500, I think, actually in the paper. Then when I spoke to one of the contractors, originally it was 2,420, and that was seated. So one is standing. Right? Okay. Right. And the third part, I know it's not seen, doesn't seem to be mentioned now when we're talking about investment and so on. What's happened to the hotel?
The hotel is moving forward. We have a developer. It's been a funding issue in terms of currently the private sector will not fund hotels because of the value of them compared to the cost. And this is one of the things which Paul was mentioning in terms of town centre loans. And we've got a town centre loan which is going to help deliver the hotel. And I'm hoping to be in a position to report to Cabinet in May on that progressing.
So the problem is the private sector funding. You know, going back to the figures, I think it was £21 million, which is no slight investment really at the end of the day. So not stepping on anybody's toes. So is the private sector not putting any into it? Or?
No, they are putting money into it. The issue is that sort of it costs 20 million circa whatever it is to build. The day it opens, it's worth 8 or 9 million. So the issue is you know, who's going to invest in that, and how long is it going to take to come back from its day one value, which it will do up to the cost and past it. So that is then the private sector funding options are not there at the moment to actually do that. But it's we've got a solution, and Cairns, the company, will take any cost risk themselves in terms of taking that forward. That's the agreement we got with them. So we're almost there in squaring the circle between all the costs and values to actually make it a viable solution.
Okay.
And we also wanted to ensure that we had a quality development there. The arena is a quality development, and we wanted the same quality to go into the public realm. So it makes Swansea a destination. You know, we want Swansea to look like Swansea, and we want it to be different. Like the bridge was, we could have put a bog standard bridge there. That was taken down, but we put a bridge that a lot of people talk about. You know, the whether it's the Crunchy Bridge or the Tapo Bridge. What's good about it? People talk about it. People are learning to actually love the bridge. So I think it's worth putting investment into quality in the beginning.
And the bridge has just been shortlisted for the planning awards.
In the chocolate award, is it? I have Councillor Peter Black, Will Thomas, and Councillor Michael Locke. Peter.
You think if they built hotels for students, it would have been built by now, wouldn't it? Yeah. But I was going to ask, in terms of the ticket sales, how does that compare to the business plan? Is that in excess of what they anticipated, or about the same?
It's probably slightly less, but that's affected by COVID up to now. And they've always, to be fair, their whole business plan is based on maturity at year 3. There were 56 events year 1. And they're looking at 100 events year 2, and then really ramping that up for year 3 up to about 200 events. And that's part of that is conferencing and breaking into the conference market, because you know most conferences are on sort of 3 or 4 year cycles, so you've got to break. It takes time to break into that. So they're very pleased with where they are at the moment in terms of sales and the quality of events which Swansea's now attracting.
You need the hotel for the conference market, don't you?
Yeah, we need more. Yeah, we need more hotels.
I know you do. Yeah.
I've spoken to a number of high quality operators
Yeah.
who said that they want at least 2 hotels in Swansea. So there's lots of demand there.
Yeah.
It's not the demand from operators, it's the economics of actually developing the hotels and getting them physically built is the issue.
Because one of the reasons the university can attract competence is because they have the student accommodation on site, which they can put people up in, and the accommodation is the key part of that. Yeah.
Okay, Councillor Will Thomas. Councillor Will Thomas.
Thanks, Chair. My question was the same as Peter's, but one point I'd just like to bring up while we have the opportunity. I was up in the park on top of the car park next to the arena the other day, and I do notice that it needs a bit of maintenance. You know, although already the sort of water had stopped running on the little water feature, and a couple of the play equipment items, you know, need to be fixed and things. So it's a flagship project. I think if it could be looked at, that'd be great.
No, I think take that on board. It's already been identified, and we're waiting for parts for various elements of it to come in to get those repaired. And obviously the sound items in the park have been sort of quietened down, and those have been resolved. So a lot of work going on. There's a whole strategy for maintenance of the whole park, which is absolutely right. It's a key sort of aspect of what's been delivered and needs to be kept in good repair.
Okay, Councillor Michael Locke.
Yeah, so I'd just like to ask for the hotel. Is this going to be a luxury hotel or a budget hotel or 3-star hotel? Or
it definitely won't be budget or 3-star.
right.
The target is I can't say what the brand is at the moment, but I think you would be pretty pleased once it gets announced. So I think we're going in the right direction. And there's, as I said, there's significant demand from Swansea from brands. And once we've got this first hotel built as well, I think that will then sort of escalate sort of interest from other hotels to come into Swansea as well. Which
yes, because if you look at Cardiff, this was other cities, this was happened. One hotel goes on the site, and then another hotel was actually next to it.
Yes, yes, they want off the back of what's happening, Marriott are rebranded, and they're spending money on the Marriott Hotel in Swansea because they know that they're going to be in a bit of a more of a fight than they've ever been. The Swansea Marriott has never ever discounted because they didn't need to, because they've got no competition. And what we need is to sort of get more competition for them and more sort of that quality hotels across the city.
Councillor Peter Black.
Just on the Marriott, my understanding was when the Marriott was built, and we were all there, but Rob and I were there in the council when we got that hotel, wasn't there a restricted covenant attached to that in terms of hotels being built within a certain perimeter around the hotel? Is that still active?
That's a legal discussion, I guess, in some respects. The actual covenant says adjacent. So what does adjacent actually mean? And there's it's still in the lease, it's still there. We've not heard a thing from Marriott about that sort of aspect.
So let's just stay quiet about that. Yeah.
I don't think it's an issue in that respect, and we're not looking to build adjacent. We're talking to the Marriott, and obviously sort of as the civic centre moves forward with Urban Splash, there's a further discussion there with the Marriott about what can we do, how can we support them, do they want a new hotel, can it be brought into the scheme? There's a number of things to be sort of worked out with them as well, and in terms of that scheme as well.
It's in there to their advantage as well to have competition. Competition drives up the standards, and I think it'll be more successful as a conference destination as well. And conferences bring in lots of money, for the hotels and for the restaurants in Swansea. Taxis, a lot really. And lots of us in this room have been on conferences around, and you take places like Brighton, they probably survive on their conferences.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you carry on?
Yep, fine. Moving on to Shaping Swansea. As we've previously reported, I think when sadly we were unsuccessful with the Luff bid for the city centre, we're looking at sort of various funding sources to replace that. We've got an ongoing discussion with Welsh Government, and there is a further round of Luff coming forward. I think one of the positives, and linking to the previous report in terms of Urban Splash, is that they said the only reason they bid for Swansea is because of they saw the agenda and what was being built in Swansea. So the arena is a catalyst in attracting the likes of Urban Splash in terms of private sector money, and the the whole reason for shaping Swansea was actually sort of getting away from the council leading in terms of funding these things, and getting the majority of funding from the likes of Urban Splash through private sector funding, through L&G, M&G, Aviva, who we've had a number of meetings with over the last sort of 3 months. The issue with Swansea on that respect is there's still a gap funding need in terms of rents are low in this part of the world, and that's something which is a discussion which we're having with Welsh Government at the moment.
Yeah, that's been a problem for many years.
Yeah.
Okay. Swansea Centre North.
Yeah, Swansea Central North. This is the area around the former St David's area. We're working hard with Urban Splash in terms of looking at what the first phase can be. That's being developed, and we're now in a position to be able to have the discussions on that with Welsh Government, where Urban Splash would raise the private sector funding, which would be tens of millions, against there's an ask to Welsh Government of a small element for gap funding to make everything work and viable. So there are various things we're looking at. We've got a shared SPF bid potentially for workup costs to help work that up, and then there are various meetings sort of being arranged to actually sort of identify these funding needs in terms of the gap funding and the major development funding. And there's been a very positive meetings with the likes of L&G, M&G and Aviva, as I said, which is a positive position because they see the benefits and what's happening in Swansea. They want to be involved as well.
Okay. No questions, right? 71, 72 the Kingsway.
Construction's advancing. It's now up to the first floor level, as you can see when you drive past. There's a good quality of construction happening as well. We are procuring agents and branding agents to look at the marketing, which is now being progressed, and discussions are out there in the market as well.
Any questions? Oh, Jeff.
Yeah, I must admit, I thought we already had a marketing agent. I think the last time we spoke, I think you actually said that there was 20% already been let or provisionally, shall we say?
Yeah, we have 25,000 square foot is currently under offer. It's 115 gross. It's about 100 net, a bit less.
Okay. Civic Centre redevelopment.
Yeah, we've there are meetings being held with CADU on the potential listing, so they're close to making a decision on that.
God, I'd be with that one.
They're looking at Urban Splash are also sort of working on the designs for this at the moment in terms of the building itself and Paxton Street and how all that fits together. So there is there's some good work being done on that as we speak.
Anyone wish to make a comment on that? Anyone online? Good luck with your discussions with CADO and about lighting it up or something like that. Okay. Project TAN 15.
TAN 15. Yeah, this is the flooding issue. The good news is that Welsh Government have gone out for consultation again, and they've suspended the original TAN document, which was produced in 2017, I believe. So there are consultations going on. There are various meetings being held with Welsh Government at planning level through POSU, which, as we said earlier, Tom Evans has been leading on. We've had a number of meetings over the last weeks with the consultants that we've got on board, looking at this and looking at the responses that we need to make to the consultation. It's worth saying that sort of there's been some huge changes in Welsh Government's approach to this. It is much better for us in terms of the city centre and what we can actually deliver there, but that's now got to be sort of embodied in the final document, which was likely to be now probably in October of this year, because of the delays. That's when it's going to come out, but I think it's definitely heading in the right direction, and as long as Welsh Government commit to what they've been saying, I think we'll be okay in terms of the schemes we've got in the city centre, which is a real positive, because there is, there's a hiatus at the moment in terms of developers and what they're prepared to commit to.
If I remember rightly, part of the problem was by a superstore on the river, and then further up, but also about the Sandfields area generally. So what if the discussions are going to place, I'm assuming climate change is going to be with us for a while, so their approach will be more about securing the area as opposed to anything else, isn't it?
I think that they've got 3 zones: Zone 1, Zone 2, Zone 3. Zone 3 is the highest flood area, which is what's in Swansea city centre, largely below sort of the Castle Gardens area. They've changed the thinking on that to allow other uses, as long as there is a mitigation position in terms of escape, etc., which is a positive. And they've also changed the position, as you allude to, in terms of actual works, because under the previous TAN, you weren't allowed to do any works, which is just nonsense, frankly. It was crazy.
Does that apply to the river corridor as well?
Yeah.
I'm thinking more up towards, definitely up towards Morristown anyway.
Yeah, the Harvard area isn't as badly affected as was previously sort of indicated by Welsh Government as well. So the flood maps will change for that, which will be all for the better. One of the main flooding issues is the river anyway, through the Sailbridge site area.
Yes.
So as you will be aware, the council committed some years ago to doing works in those areas within the 75-year period, which was actually set by NRW. So there will be some works required. It's already started. In terms of the other area, which was a real issue, was the bridge and the gap underneath it next to the Civic.
Yes, that's been
and that's been blocked up, and that was identified as one of the key flooding issues for the Sandfields as well. So that's been done. So the other main area is along the river by Sainsbury's down to the Sailbridge site, which needs to be considered.
Further up the river, where we give the sacrificial land for the flooding, I'm assuming that will remain the same.
Yes.
Councillor Davis?
Yeah, whilst this is a Swansea problem, it's a Welsh problem.
Yeah.
This TAN 15 would affect coastal towns and cities. Well, Wales, as you know, is mainly made up of coastal towns and cities because of how it developed. And so it's as big a problem for Newport or Cardiff or Swansea, right away around. And again, I think we'd be remiss again not to thank people like Tom Evans, who's done a great job, and also the 22 planning authorities in Wales, but especially the leader who brought it up with the WLGA, and everybody's worked together. The TAN 15 came about because Natural Resources Wales were working on this global warming and what was needed to be done, and Welsh Government. The report came out just after COVID, and I think that perhaps it didn't have as much scrutiny into it as was needed. And so the WLGA, along with all of the planning officers, have made many recommendations which seem to be taken on board, and that the TAN 15, when it comes out, I'm sure will not put a stop on development in those areas, but enable development sensible at the same time, because nobody's denying global warming. We all know that, and that there needs to be measures to ensure the safety of those regions, but at the same time not stifling the regeneration within those areas. So I think the new legislation, when it comes out, I think it is going to be workable, and that we can carry on with all the plans, because it could have, things like Blue Eden, where we are taking energy from the sea, but that we need to do the land side development first to enable it. And we were talking about earlier on about private investment and therefore profit. Unless you do the land side first, you don't get to raise the money to actually do the sea side work. And so it is important that TAN 15 is put right. And I'm I'm sure that 10-15, when it comes out now, will be making us all happier.
I think the best thing to do is wait and see about that. Next item is Castle Square.
Yep, Castle Square.
I'd say that we did ask for some details on Castle Square, on the financial options and what have you, and apparently it was sent to the wrong officer. So I suggest that that question is still up in the air.
Okay.
So if we can have that answer, and then we can, I think there's no point in discussing it now if we're going to have to come back to it.
Fine. I thought that one of my team had actually responded to that, but she hasn't sent that to you, has she?
Yeah, I think she has been in touch, so she does have the she's going to get in touch with the details for that.
Okay,
hopefully
great.
soon.
Okay,
Okay.
then we move on to Community Hub. Looks blank.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything, any updates on that at the moment. That's one for Jeff to update really. But
Okay, Councillor,
I understand there's a further FR17 coming to Cabinet in May.
I believe that's the case. I'm not. This is not one of our projects, so I'd have to ask Jeff to clarify what the position on that is.
Okay, thanks.
Shall I move on to Skyline?
yeah, oh yes, please.
Okay, well, the initial public consultation has been completed. There were a number of events in the Village Hotel, in Landor Social Club, and in Bonamine. All that's being collated as we speak, but the positive response was quite resounding from what I understand in terms of the initial works which have been done. But there will be a report collated from all the consultations, which we will be then submitted as part of a planning application, which will come in due course. Planning is being prepared, and that is being looked at for submission in July.
Councillor Peter Blair. Have you finished?
Yeah, well, the designs are obviously have been worked up, and those were sort of put on various boards in the 3 consultation events as well. And there was a team from Skyline, including their architects, planners, etc., and 3 members of the Skyline board who were in Swansea to answer any questions. So there was a very large turnout for these events as well, which was really good.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. First of all, I hope that, unlike Castle Square, we'll actually get this before Planning Committee and not a delegated decision making, because there is some controversy about this, which I think needs to be heard in public, and councillors have a proper chance to have a say in us in planning. I'm not prejudging anything here, but I think it's important that this one comes to Planning Committee, unlike Castle Square. The £4 million grant from the Welsh Government is very welcome. Obviously, however, the reports of that in today's Evening Post and other outlets suggested that Swansea Council was also in negotiation about giving a grant to Skyline as well. Obviously, you can't give details of that, but it does seem to me that when we had the discussion last time in Canberra, the impression we had was that this was going to be all private sector money, with the exception of possibly any grant the Welsh Government comes up with. And now it appears that we're going to be asked to put our hands in our pockets as well. So I just want some clarification on that, because it does seem to me that this has moved on from what we originally thought it was going to be.
There is an ongoing discussion with Skyline about the funding and how it works. Skyline are looking to put about 36 million of their own money into this. There is no agreement as yet with Skyline. That's still sort of an ongoing discussion. And I think we've always said that there's been a discussion on this ongoing. It has progressed more recently. There have been discussions on legal agreements in terms of the heads of terms and a funding agreement as well. So that is in play at the moment, and we're waiting for responses from Skyline at the moment.
Anyone else? Councillor Michael Lock.
Yes, in this morning's Evening Post, I've seen that strange that this morning's Evening Post, it actually says that people in Swansea will have this facility at a reduced price.
Yeah.
So roughly, can't give details, but roughly how much?
Yeah, well, it's £40 per annum is what they're saying is the for adults would be an annual pass for anybody who lives in Swansea, not just the area. So that is seems ridiculously good money, but a good value for money to me, to be honest with you, for a year's pass to be able to use the facilities and get up to the top of the hill on the cable car. So,
Okay.
and yeah,
Assuming that, then they must have a business plan to be able to produce a £40 figure.
well, they have a business plan, yeah, which
Would be interesting to see
it's
whether or not we can see it. At the
well,
moment.
that's their business plan. I'd have to ask them the question whether
Yeah, I think you would have to ask them,
Yes,
because that is, you know, I think, Sally on, Councillor Jeff Jones.
Yeah, I only read in the Evening Post myself this morning that the Welsh Government, is it a 4 million grant or whatever?
No, it's
no,
not
I think
quite
it's
like that.
3 million grant,
3
and 1
million
million loan
grant.
from
And you
Welsh
said,
Government.
and Skyline to put it in 30.
36 million.
What is the total project cost then?
The total, well, I think the total project cost is close to 40 million, as I understand it at the moment.
Right,
It's
right.
about 68 million New Zealand dollars, and I don't know what the exchange rate is.
Nah, it's none in sheep, innit? So many sheep per pound. Sorry.
Can I ask? I mean, obviously, what you've said the Welsh Government is putting in and what Skyline are putting in sounds like the total amount. So is this dependent on money coming from Swansea Council, or is that just their wishful thinking?
No, I think that there is a requirement of public money to go into the scheme to meet basically most companies have got an internal rate of return IRR, which they need to hit to actually make an investment. The business case shows that the Skyline IRR wouldn't be hit until about year 13. Usually their requirement is year 10. But they need this money to actually sort of meet the internal rate of return to justify the investment from their perspective.
So we are looking at Swansea Council having to put money into this.
There will be an element of money.
And will that be a loan? Will that be a grant? Or are we looking at, if it's a grant, will there be investment returns coming back to us for that?
That is part of the ongoing discussion. We haven't got to the end of that yet, I'm afraid, so I can't really answer that.
I think we need to have a report back when that is concluded in camera if necessary.
Yeah.
But you've obviously seen the business plan. If it's the IRA, it's going to be,
yes.
Is year, did you say year 15?
Year 13 is currently sort of is their break.
So the gap funding would need to bring it down below 10.
10 is their requirement as a business, which is fairly standard requirement in many cases.
Okay.
Yes, I just looked up on my phone. 68 million New Zealand dollars is 35 million pounds.
So it's about 36 million, I think, is the cost. But they have that they're still through the consultation. They will be amending the scheme and changing things, and so that's a variable until they actually submit the planning consent as well.
So how far away are we from realistically seeing soil being dug up?
The current program which they're running is start on site in December, January, and a completion in 2020.
December, January in the winter, or
well,
summer or winter?
Well, it's their spring at the moment, but yeah, they basically want to try and get on with some of the works there before the really bad sort of weather kicks in essence. So yeah, so it's November they'd like to start. My personal view is it'll probably be January before they actually would start.
Got one more question. In terms of the park and ride, my understanding from the consultation meetings is they were quite clear that the park and ride would have to move for this. Is that certain? Are we looking at a new site for that park and ride?
There's highway colleagues are looking at different sites for the park and ride. It doesn't have to move. Initially, it can be big. You know, Skyline want 300 spaces basically dedicated for them. It won't be owned by them. It'll still be a council car park is the current plan thinking. And the park and ride could move to other parts, or we could use the park and ride extension as part of the in lieu of the park and ride. So there's various options which are being considered at the moment for that to happen.
There is quite a lot of room there as well, isn't it?
It's not very well used, as I'm informed by highways colleagues.
Yeah, I think the thing is, have we worked through how this impacts on the travel plan for Swansea.com Stadium?
That there's an ongoing discussion with the stadium, which yes is not finished, but that's something which is an ongoing discussion.
No,
yeah.
Obviously, as time goes on, there'll be more that can be discussed, because I think it is important that, because of the size of the project and what it covers and the scale of what it covers, I think we need to have that discussion further on. Right, shall we move on to the redevelopment Harvard Copperworks?
Yeah, I think Paul's going to cover this one.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Chair. So the